Welcome to the review of the Slim CD reporting hierarchy. First, I'll start with a little information about our company, and you can take a quick read through that. I've shown that in a lot of other videos, so we'll skip past that. We provide a hierarchy of data so that the merchant's organization can be reflected in the reporting hierarchy within Slim CD, giving you the ability to access just the data you want in certain situations, limiting the scope for maybe a clerk or for a particular store, but expanding the scope for a headquarters or even a franchise chain, etc. So we start with clients. So each individual merchant account is a site, and the site goes underneath a client. So you might have a retail store with a website, which might be two different merchant accounts, a retail account and a web e-commerce account. So it might be two different sites for each merchant. By default, each client has one site and one only, but you can add to those sites as the merchant expands their business. So the lowest level you can log in at is at the client level. Underneath a client, you can create clerks, and the clerks can be restricted to only see one site. So maybe you have someone who fulfills web orders and all they get to see is the web site, and you might have the cashiers in the front, and then when they log in they get to see the retail site, but the manager logs in and gets to see both sites. So as the store grows and gets multiple locations, you might add multiple locations, and then headquarters or accounting would like to log in and see all of the stores and all of their sites underneath them. We call this a chain or a bank level, and above that is a master level, which can cover an entire group of chains. So if you have, say, divisions by state, which are set up as chains, and then divisions for the whole country, a login for the whole country or the whole company might be at the master level. So here is that overview again in a little different format. So the site level is tied specifically to a merchant account, and it is underneath a client. So it's underneath the client level login or the clerk level login for a client. So when we create clerk logins or API access credentials, they are created at the client level, but if you'd like, they can be restricted just to a specific site, or they can look at all the sites underneath a particular client. And again, a client is usually a location tied to an address, etc., and it also has its own set of clerks and cashiers, etc., underneath it. The chain level, as I mentioned, can group together groups of clients, and you can have clerk web logins at the chain level so that someone in accounting or two or three people in accounting can each have their own login, and you can tell who's doing what at that chain level. And again, the rarely used but highest level is the master level when you've got groups of chains. So if you had a store with a number of franchisees, each franchisee might be a chain with two or three stores underneath it, but the master level might be for the entire company. Our reports give you a lot of information. You can get reports by site, you can get reports by client, you can also get reports by clerk or by device. So when you use a clerk login, it records that in each transaction, and then you can get a clerk report, which can also show tips. So for servers in a restaurant, you'll get the clerk's transactions, and any tip information will be associated with that. If you, as a developer, specify the clerk name field, you can actually use it to distinguish between certain sales promotions or certain origins of transactions, like from Salesforce or Amazon, etc. So you can track some information that way. If you want to, you can use the clerk for that within a site, and it gives you a great way to, on an individual merchant account, break out information. Device reports are also available. For actual devices, it will show, for instance, the mobile phone being used will default to, it's 8 digits, so will default to the phone number. If it's a pin pad, will actually get the PC that's connected to, or the serial number of the device, things like that. So the device reports pretty much are for devices, but you can actually also use them to do things like tracking Salesforce as well if you wanted to. You have up to 8 characters in there. API access credential considerations, they are not the same as a clerk, and you can provide a clerk that will override the API access credential in our reports. However, if you don't, then the API access credential will appear in the reports as its own clerk name, because that's what originated the transaction. So by default, if you don't provide a clerk name on your connection to us, your HTTP post or your library call, then the API access credential will appear in the reports so that you know where the transaction came from. If you do provide a clerk name, that'll override the API access credential. This kind of gives you the best of both worlds, that if you use an API access credential on a website, you'll know by the API access credential which origin it came from. However, if you're using it in a restaurant system, you can also provide the clerk name, and that will associate your servers with their tips, etc. Clerk web logins are specific to a individual client, as I mentioned. They can be used to log into the website or the Slim CD for PC software or our mobile applications. So clerk web logins are valid logins to the system where API access credentials are not. If you log in with the client ID, the numeric client ID, and its password, the clerk field will show admin in many places. So you will want to be able to distinguish who logged in as the admin based on that. Otherwise, if you give each user their own clerk name, which we do suggest, then it'll show the actual clerk names. And as I mentioned before, you can have web logins for web reports only, not for running transactions at the chain level and at the master level. Those are only for viewing reports, etc. You can do some minor transactions there, but mainly those are intended to be done for report pulling, etc. And of course, the clerk reports will show who did what in transaction totals. Let's take a minute and go to the Slim CD website, see how a lot of this works. So I'm actually going to log in as a test account. And as I log in as a test account, I can look under my reports, and here is the clerk report. So those reports are available here. And if I look on the API, in the reference section, providing username and password on, I'll go to reports again, say get batch history. So here we do need a username and password. Again, you can put an API access credential with a blank password and specify the site ID, or else you can give a clerk name and a password and pull reports down. You can get a variety of reports this way. You can get transaction details, search transactions, very useful for pulling down data across a chain, for instance, to do automatic reconciliation into an accounting system, or automatically reconciling web orders from a clerk that's designated just to get the web reports and report orders you got off the website. So check out a developer's website. It's got a lot of information, all the APIs available. Again, remember, clerk level logins can log in the website. API credentials cannot. API access credentials are tied specifically to a clerk, but it's nice to know that as you're, specifically to a client, but it's nice to know that as you're creating these transactions, you're actually building data into the hierarchy that you might later be able to use and extract to get a wider variety of reports as you're designing the Slim CD hierarchy to fit the actual footprint of the merchant as their stores are set up or as they grow. So again, I invite you to take a look at the developer's website and the APIs that we have, the entry points. We've covered a lot of this in other videos, so please take a look at all of those. And here's all the resources you need to do that. So this gives you an overview of the hierarchy and when you're doing things, what you're actually affecting as you're building things into these higher level chains. Not everyone will have a chain login, not everyone will have a master login, but as the business grows, it's nice to know you can add those things if you need to. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this, and please contact us if you have any questions or you need additional support.